Everyone in the room seemed to be working diligently, but not Kim. She was close to tears. She was so frustrated. The project was supposed to be finished in 8 days, 7 now, and she was just realizing that she would have to start over from the very beginning. All the work she had done had led to nothing, a dead end. She was sorry that she had ever signed up for an art class. She thought it might be fun. That had been a big mistake. It was a class in fiber arts that met Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10 o'clock in room 224 of the Coleman Slattery Fine Arts Building. Kim's teacher, Ms. Dillard, had suggested that the class try making a ritual object, or perhaps imitate an animal form. Kim didn't know anything about ritual objects. Sacrificial altars and knives? Nothing came to mind. An animal form? Kim liked horses. Maybe she could make something that would look like a horse. If she coiled the sisal rope they were using around some kind of four-legged armature. She'd been working on it for 3 classes, and she knew she was in way over her head. Her horse would only resemble a horse in some cartoon, but she had too much time in it to change now. Don't switch horses in midstream, that was something her father liked to say. And now the phrase ran through Kim's mind as she struggled to make her project look like a horse. She was working on it when Ms. Dillard came by for a closer inspection. Ms. Dillard never smiled, and she was a very tough grader, just the type of teacher to discourage a student who had signed up thinking the class might be fun. Kim had the horse in her lap, on its back, as it were, with its feet sticking up in the air. Miss Dillard looked at it for a while, from across the table, then walked behind her and looked at it some more. Kim began to feel very ashamed about her poor, twisted, cartoon horse. Then Miss Dillard spoke. Vegetative forms are another possibility that I neglected to mention. These flowers that you're working on have a good potential. What you have to guard against is being overly cute. Kim didn't know what to say. Do you understand what I'm getting at, Miss Dillard said. Yes, I think so, said Kim. We don't want to get too cute, Miss Dillard said, offering her poor excuse for a smile. I'll try, said Kim, smiling back in the same sorry way. I'll try not to. So Kim's little horse had become a patch of flowers. The problem with that is, after Miss Dillard walked on to check the work of another student, when Kim looked at her project, she still saw an upside-down horse, not flowers that were dangerously close to being too cute. She felt frustrated and upset and close to tears. She realized that she would have to abandon this project and start all over. And there was so little time. The bells out in the hall rang, announcing a change of class. Completely discouraged, taking a peek to see that Miss Dillard's attention was elsewhere, Kim stuffed her project into an ash can and left the room. At 12:30, the students in the Principles of Design class filed into room 224 of the Coleman Slattery Fine Arts Building. One of them, Louise, was nearly desperate, although she was doing her best to appear calm. At the end of the term was approaching, and Louise was far behind in her work. She was so far behind that she couldn't figure out how she would ever finish all the work. And Louise prided herself on being able to bail herself out of completely impossible situations. She'd been doing it for years, barely escaping calamity, but now she'd need the intervention of a benevolent deity if she was to pass this course. Louise didn't know if there was such a being, but she was addressing a few thoughts to him or her just in case as she was entering room 224. She was behind because she'd skipped a few classes early on, and then she'd been sick, and then her grandmother had died, and she'd gone home for the funeral, and the result was that Louise truly needed the miracle she was praying for. Somehow she had to come up with 4 brilliant projects in a week, or she was certain to flunk the class. And if she flunked the class, she wouldn't graduate. Her work area was near the trash can last used by Kim. Louise noticed the funny-looking rope thing in the garbage and lifted it out. One of the requirements for her class was a mobile. Louise, ready to grab at any straw or hunk of rope, had a sudden flash, a vision. If she could paint this thing and add beads and glitter, maybe she could call it a mobile and get away with it. That's what art was all about, anyway, wasn't it? Whatever you could get away with, that was art. Louise had a proud history of getting away with a lot of stuff. It was crazy, really, some of the shit she'd pulled. She believed she had the makings of a fine artist. Louise spent her class painting the rope thing and sticking beads and glitter in the paint. She used bright colors and went for sharp contrast in the beads and glitter. The more she worked, the more it reminded her of one of those things Mexican kids swing sticks at that were made of papier-mâché and filled with presents. Louise couldn't remember what they were called, but she knew they existed and that they were hung by ropes like mobiles, and another quality of art was that it could be one thing while suggesting another. Louise became quite happy as she worked on her project, her old confidence returning. 1 down, she thought, 3 to go. Then her teacher, Mr. Quant, came by. He asked her what she was working on, and Louise told him it was her mobile. She wanted to tell him all about how it was supposed to remind the viewer of the thing Mexican kids swung sticks at, but she still couldn't think of the word for it, so she kept that to herself. She'd look it up. Meanwhile, Mr. Quant was examining her project and frowning. "I don't know, Louise," he said. "This is striking. It's striking, but it's also heavy. Mobiles traditionally give an impression of airiness, of lightness, and elegance, a balletic quality. It's almost as if the elements are floating in space by themselves. You know what I mean?" As Mr. Quant described the ideal mobile, he gestured with his hands and rose up on his toes to give an impression of airiness. Louise could have died standing next to him. She nodded, trying to keep her spirits up. The news she was getting here was not good. She could tell by the tone of Mr. Quant's voice. He didn't like what she was doing, and she wasn't going to get away with this. Darn it. He was still talking. "Think you might try smaller units using a different material. I'm not saying that there aren't any set rules you have to follow. A good part of art is declaring your own rules. Of course that's true. But there are certain expectations or conventions that you're either playing with or playing against. And do you understand what I'm getting at?" Louise nodded. "I think so," she said, smiling. Her project was going back in the trash. And that's where it went.